Liam felt the weight of their eyes on him, a physical pressure that made the fine china in his hands feel impossibly heavy. The dining room of his mother-in-law's mansion was a cavern of judgment, lit by a crystal chandelier that seemed to mock the dimness of his own life. Every clink of a fork, every hushed whisper, was a verdict delivered against him. He had failed. His wife Clara sat beside him, a beautiful, cold statue carved from ice. She had not looked at him once since they arrived, her attention fixed on her mother, Eleanor, who presided over the table like a cruel queen on her throne. Marcus, Clara's brother, smirked at him from across the expanse of polished mahogany, his eyes glittering with a familiar predatory glee. The news of Liam's layoff had been the appetizer, served up by Clara with a casual, devastating bitterness before the soup had even been ladled. "Liam lost his job," she had announced to the room, her voice as clear and sharp as breaking glass. "The construction company went under. Imagine that." Eleanor had placed her spoon down with theatrical slowness. "Lost his job? Again?" she had asked, though it was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of what she had always believed about the man her daughter had inexplicably married. Liam was a creature of constant, predictable failure. Now, dessert was being served, a delicate raspberry mousse that tasted like ash in Liam's mouth. The humiliation was complete, a thick sauce poured over his already wounded pride. He had tried to explain that the company had downsized, that it wasn't his fault, but his words had dissolved in the oppressive silence of the room. They did not care for reasons or excuses, they only cared for results, for status, for the gleaming facade of success that their family, the Sterling family, had so carefully constructed. "Well," Eleanor said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, "something must be done. We can't have Clara married to an unemployed man. It's unseemly." Marcus chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "What's he qualified to do? Carry heavy things and get dirty?" Liam's hands tightened on his silverware. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, to unleash the torrent of frustration and anger that was building inside his chest. But he looked at Clara, at her perfect, emotionless face, and the words died in his throat. Arguing would only make it worse. It would give them more ammunition, more proof of his unsuitability, of his lack of refinement. He had learned long ago that silence was his only shield, however thin and inadequate it might be. Eleanor's eyes, cold and calculating, settled on him. A slow, reptilian smile spread across her lips. It was the smile of someone who had just conceived of a particularly delicious cruelty. "I have an idea," she declared, her voice cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. "It's a bit of charity, of course, but family is family even when they disappoint us." She paused for dramatic effect, ensuring she had the full attention of her audience. "Sterling Innovations has an opening. It's not glamorous, but it's a steady paycheck. More than you're getting now, which is nothing." Liam felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He knew what was coming. He could see it in the triumphant glint in her eyes, in the way Marcus was barely suppressing a laugh. "We need a new janitor for the executive wing," Eleanor said, the words dripping with condescension. "The hours are late, so you won't be underfoot. You'll sweep the floors, empty the bins. Simple work for a simple man." The room fell silent. The cruelty of the offer was breathtaking. It was not a helping hand, it was a public shaming. It was a way to put him in his place, to make him a literal servant in the empire they had built, an empire he would never be a part of. He could feel the blood drain from his face. He looked to Clara, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes. He prayed she would say something, that she would defend him, that she would tell her mother how monstrous and humiliating this was. Clara met his gaze for a fleeting moment. There was no warmth, no support. There was only a chilling emptiness, a void where love was supposed to be. She turned away, shrugging delicately. "It's a job, Liam," she said, her voice distant. "You can't afford to be proud right now." Her betrayal was more painful than any insult her mother could devise. It was a final, definitive severing of the bond he thought they shared. In that moment, something inside him, something that had been slowly cracking for years, finally shattered. "So, what do you say?" Eleanor pressed, enjoying his torment. "Will you accept our generous offer?" Liam looked down at his plate. He saw not the raspberry mousse, but a reflection of his own defeated face. He felt trapped, cornered, with no way out. To refuse was to be labelled ungrateful and lazy. To accept was to swallow the sharpest poison of his life. With a voice he barely recognized as his own, hollow and brittle, he gave his answer. "Yes," he whispered, "I'll take the job." Marcus burst into laughter, no longer bothering to hide his contempt. Eleanor's smile widened, a victor's smirk, and Clara, his wife, simply picked up her spoon and took another bite of her dessert, as if nothing had happened at all. The ride home was a symphony of silence. Clara drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of her luxury sedan, a car Liam's meagre salary had never been able to afford. He sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights, feeling like a ghost. The man who had walked into that mansion was not the same one who was leaving it. That man had still clung to a sliver of hope, a belief that his love for Clara could bridge the chasm between their worlds. This new man, the one sitting in the silent car, knew the truth. The chasm was unbridgeable. He was, and always would be, on the wrong side of it. They had been married for 5 years, a union that had begun with what Liam had mistaken for love. Clara had been charmed by his quiet strength, his grounded nature, a stark contrast to the slick, entitled men in her social circle. He, in turn, had been captivated by her beauty and vivacity, blinded by the light she seemed to radiate. But the light had faded quickly, replaced by the long, cold shadow of her family's expectations. Eleanor had despised him from the start. She saw him as a commoner, a nobody who had somehow tricked her daughter into a disastrous marriage. Her disapproval was a constant, corrosive presence in their lives. She criticized his job, his clothes, his manners, his very existence. Clara, once his defender, had slowly, insidiously begun to adopt her mother's perspective. His small apartment became cramped. His steady but modest income became inadequate. His contentment with a simple life became a lack of ambition. The years had been a slow erosion of his spirit. He had worked harder, taken extra shifts, tried to climb a ladder that seemed to have no end, all to win an approval that was never going to be given. He had endured condescending remarks at family holidays and snide comments at exclusive parties he was dragged to. He had smiled and nodded while Marcus bragged about his latest promotion at Sterling Innovations, a position he was woefully unqualified for. He had done it all for Clara, but tonight, sitting in the car next to a woman who had watched him be flayed alive and done nothing, he finally understood. His love had been a one-sided sacrifice. He had been giving pieces of himself away until there was almost nothing left. When they got home to their small, sterile apartment, a place Clara insisted on calling temporary, she finally spoke. "You start Monday," she said, tossing her keys onto the counter. "My mother will have the paperwork sent over." She did not look at him. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy, "how could you let them do that?" She finally turned to face him, her expression a mask of cold fury. "Let them? They offered you a job, Liam, a job at one of the most successful tech firms in the country. You should be grateful." "A janitor, Clara! It was to humiliate me." "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she snapped. "Your pride is not going to pay our bills. My mother is right. You need to be useful for a change." The word useful struck him like a physical blow. It was the same word Eleanor had used. He saw it then, the complete and utter alignment of their thinking. His wife and his mother-in-law were one and the same. He felt a profound and desolate sense of loneliness. He was an island, and the tide was rising. Without another word, he walked past her and into their bedroom. He went to the closet, a small walk-in space that was mostly filled with Clara's designer clothes and shoe boxes. In the back, on the top shelf, covered in a thin layer of dust, was an old leather briefcase. It had belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Vance. Arthur had been a strange, brilliant man, a reclusive inventor who had passed away when Liam was just a boy. He had left Liam this briefcase with strict instructions to only open it when you have nothing left to lose. Liam had always treasured it as a memento, a link to the only family he had truly known. He had never felt the need to open it. He had always had something to lose, his hope, his dignity, his love for Clara. But tonight, he had lost it all. He pulled the briefcase down from the shelf. The leather was cracked and worn, but the brass latches were still sturdy. He carried it into the living room and set it on the coffee table. Clara watched him from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. "What is that old thing?" she asked with disdain. "Something my grandfather left me," he said, his voice flat. He fumbled with the latches. They were locked. He remembered a small, ornate key that his grandfather had given him, which he kept in a little box of keepsakes. He retrieved the key and inserted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. He lifted the lid. The inside was not filled with old tools or blueprints as he might have expected. It was filled with documents, thick stacks of paper bound in legal tape, covered in dense, incomprehensible text. There were share certificates, trust agreements, and incorporation papers for a company he had never heard of, Vance Legacy Holdings. On the very top of the pile was a single, sealed envelope made of heavy parchment. His name was written on the front in his grandfather's elegant, spidery script. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Liam," it began, "if you are reading this, it means the world has finally pushed you into a corner. I am sorry for that, but I am also, in a way, proud. It means you have endured. Now, it is time for you to learn how to fight back." The letter went on to explain in simple terms the complex truth hidden within the documents. His grandfather had not just been an inventor. He had been a genius of business and strategy. Decades ago, he had developed a revolutionary series of patents for microprocessing technology. A young, ambitious company had wanted to buy them. That company was Sterling Innovations, founded by Eleanor's late husband, Robert Sterling. Robert had been arrogant, certain he could swindle the eccentric inventor out of his life's work for a pittance. But Arthur Vance was 10 steps ahead of him. He agreed to the sale, but not for cash. Instead, he structured a deal that was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. He transferred the patents to a shell company, which was then acquired by Sterling Innovations. In exchange, his own private holding company, Vance Legacy Holdings, was given a 95% stake in Sterling Innovations itself. Robert Sterling, blinded by his greed for the patents, had signed the papers without fully understanding the implications. He had been given the title of CEO and a generous salary, a figurehead, to run the company, but the ownership, the real power, had always remained with Arthur Vance, and now it belonged to Liam. Liam read the final lines of the letter, his heart pounding in his chest. "For they built their kingdom on my foundations, my boy. They have grown rich and arrogant, forgetting who holds the deed to the land beneath their castle. That deed is now yours. This briefcase contains everything you need. The key is not just for this case. It is for a safety deposit box at the firm of Thompson and Associates. Go and see Mr. Thompson. He was my lawyer and my friend. He has been waiting for you." Liam looked up from the letter, his mind reeling. He stared at the stacks of documents, the proof of an impossible truth. He was not a failure. He was not a charity case. He was the owner. He owned all of it, the mansion, the company, the cars, the life they lorded over him. It was all his. Clara was still watching him, her face a mixture of impatience and annoyance. "Well, did your grandfather leave you a treasure map?" she sneered. Liam slowly folded the letter and placed it back on the pile. He looked at his wife, at the woman who had just condemned him to a life of humiliation. For the first time in years, he did not feel small or weak in her presence. He felt a cold, hard certainty settle deep within his soul. A sense of power, quiet and immense, began to bloom in the barren wasteland of his heart. He closed the briefcase, the latches clicking shut like the cocking of a gun. "Something like that," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Something exactly like that." The next morning, Liam called the law firm of Thompson and Associates. The receptionist was polite but firm. Mr. Thompson was a very busy man, and his schedule was booked for months. Liam took a breath. "Please tell him that Arthur Vance's grandson is calling," he said. "Tell him I have the key." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a flurry of muffled activity. A moment later, a new voice came on, rich and resonant with age. "This is Jonathan Thompson. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Liam Vance," Liam said. "I believe you've been waiting for my call." An appointment was made for that afternoon. Liam told Clara he was going to a job interview, a lie that slipped out with surprising ease. She had merely grunted in response, not bothering to ask for details. The law office was in a stately old building downtown with marble floors and walls panelled in dark wood. It smelled of old paper and quiet authority. Mr. Thompson was an elderly man with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through him. He greeted Liam with a warm, firm handshake. "I knew your grandfather well," he said, leading Liam into a large, book-lined office. "A brilliant man, a truly brilliant man. I have been the custodian of his legacy for over 30 years. I am relieved to finally pass that duty on to you." For the next 3 hours, Mr. Thompson explained everything. He laid out the corporate structure, the trust funds, the network of shell companies that his grandfather had created. It was a fortress of legal and financial power designed to be impenetrable. Sterling Innovations was merely the crown jewel in a much larger empire that Arthur Vance had built in secret. "Your grandfather never trusted the Sterlings," Thompson explained. "He saw the greed in Robert from day one. He let him run the company, let him feel important, but Arthur always held the reins. After Robert's death, his wife Eleanor took over. She is, if you'll forgive my frankness, even more arrogant and less competent than her husband was." Liam nodded, the lawyer's words confirming everything he had experienced firsthand. "They've been running the company into the ground with their extravagance," Thompson continued, pushing a thick financial report across the desk. "Embezzlement, fraudulent expenses, paying their incompetent son Marcus an obscene salary for a no-show job. It's all in here. They believe the company is their personal piggy bank." Liam scanned the numbers, his anger simmering. The money they had spent on parties, on cars, on jewelry, it was his money, stolen from his grandfather's legacy. "There's more," Thompson said, his expression grim. "They are currently trying to orchestrate a merger with a rival corporation. This would effectively dissolve Sterling Innovations and pay them out a fortune. It is, of course, entirely illegal, as they do not have the authority to sell an asset they do not own. They are committing massive fraud." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was their end game: to cash out, to take the money and run, leaving the husk of his grandfather's company behind. "What do we do?" Liam asked, his voice low and steady. Mr. Thompson smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. "We do what your grandfather would have done. We let them think they are winning. We give them enough rope and we watch as they construct their own gallows." A plan began to form, elegant and surgical in its design. It was a plan that required patience, precision, and a certain kind of cold-blooded resolve that Liam was only now discovering he possessed. "There is one thing," Liam said, a strange idea taking root in his mind. "They offered me a job." He explained the situation, the humiliating offer to work as a janitor. Mr. Thompson listened intently, his fingers steepled. When Liam finished, the old lawyer leaned back in his chair and let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, that is perfect," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The irony is poetic. Your grandfather would have loved it. By all means, Mr. Vance, take the job." On Monday evening, Liam reported for his first shift at Sterling Innovations. He was given a grey uniform that smelled of disinfectant, a cart with a squeaky wheel, and a set of keys that opened every door in the executive wing. The building was mostly empty, a silent, echoing monument to the Sterling family's ego. Portraits of Robert, Eleanor, and even Marcus hung on the walls, their painted eyes following him as he pushed his mop across the gleaming marble floors. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were an actor playing a role. He was not Liam the failure, the janitor. He was Liam Vance, the owner, conducting a reconnaissance mission deep in enemy territory. He cleaned the boardroom, polishing the long table where they made their fraudulent deals. He emptied the trash in Eleanor's opulent office, finding discarded credit card receipts for $1,000 dinners and designer handbags. He vacuumed the rug in Marcus's office, a room that clearly saw little use, a fine layer of dust coating every surface except for the golf putter leaning against the wall. He saw the inner workings of their arrogance and their waste. He heard the whispers from the few late-working employees, hushed complaints about budget cuts for research and development, while the executives bought new cars. He was a ghost in their machine, invisible, and it gave him a unique and powerful perspective. Clara treated his new job with a mixture of disgust and relief. She hated the thought of him being a janitor in her family's company, but she was pleased that a paycheck, however small, would be coming in. She never asked him about his work. When he came home late at night, smelling of cleaning chemicals, she would already be in bed, a silken sleep mask over her eyes, creating a physical barrier between them. Their marriage had become a hollow shell, a contractual obligation they were both waiting to expire. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Mr. Thompson began to execute their plan. The first step was quiet, almost imperceptible. Acting on behalf of the anonymous majority shareholder, he filed a formal request with the board of directors for a full and immediate forensic audit of the company's finances, citing concerns about potential executive malfeasance. The letter arrived at Eleanor's office via a certified courier on a Wednesday afternoon. Liam was cleaning the hallway windows just outside her door, his presence completely ignored by the frantic people rushing in and out. He heard Eleanor's shriek of outrage through the thick oak door. "An audit! Who dares? Who is this majority shareholder? It's impossible! Panic began to ripple through the executive wing. Marcus stormed out of his mother's office, his face pale and sweaty. "This is a disaster. They'll find everything," he hissed into his phone. Liam continued to wipe down the glass, his movements slow and methodical, his expression placid. Inside, he felt a grim satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. The auditors descended a week later. They were a team of humorless, efficient professionals hired by Thompson, and they answered to no one but him. They took over the main conference room, demanding access to every financial record, every expense report, every contract for the last 10 years. Eleanor tried to intimidate them, to bluster her way through, but they were unmovable. They had a legal mandate from the owner of the company, and her authority meant nothing to them. The cascade effect began almost immediately. The company credit cards issued to Eleanor and Marcus were frozen due to irregular spending patterns. Eleanor had a humiliating public meltdown at a high-end boutique when her card was declined. The news spread through her social circle like wildfire. Marcus, in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, was caught by a night security guard trying to sneak boxes of shredded documents out of the building. The guard, following protocol, reported it to the head of the audit team. Liam watched it all unfold from his unique vantage point. He listened to the panicked whispers of secretaries. He cleaned up the coffee Eleanor had thrown against a wall in a fit of rage. He heard Marcus on the phone begging their personal banker to extend them a line of credit, only to be coldly refused. The Sterling name, once a golden key that opened any door, was rapidly becoming toxic. Clara was a wreck. Her entire world was built on the foundation of her family's wealth and status, and that foundation was crumbling. She came home one night, her face streaked with tears. "The bank is threatening to repossess my car," she cried. "The club has suspended our membership. This is all your fault, Liam. You brought this bad luck upon us." Liam looked at her, at this woman who could feel no empathy, only self-pity. He felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, not even pity, just a vast, empty distance. "Maybe you should get a job," he said quietly, echoing the words she had so often thrown at him. The look of sheer shock and outrage on her face was almost comical. The final blow for the Sterlings came when the preliminary audit report was leaked to the financial press. The headlines were brutal. Sterling Innovations embroiled in massive fraud scandal. CEO and VP accused of embezzlement. The company's stock, the small portion that was publicly traded, plummeted. The merger was officially declared dead. Their reputation was not just tarnished, it was utterly destroyed. Mr. Thompson called for an emergency board meeting. It was scheduled for a Friday morning in the main boardroom. The purpose was to present the final audit findings and to announce the intentions of the majority shareholder. The night before the meeting, Liam worked his last shift as a janitor. He meticulously cleaned the boardroom one final time. He polished the long, dark table until it shone like a mirror, reflecting the empty chairs that would soon be filled with the architects of their own destruction. He felt a profound sense of calm. The storm he had unleashed was about to make landfall. On the morning of the meeting, Liam did not put on his grey janitor's uniform. Instead, he dressed in a dark, perfectly tailored suit that Mr. Thompson had insisted on buying for him. It felt like armor. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw not the beaten-down man from a few weeks ago, but a stranger with cold, determined eyes. He saw Arthur Vance's grandson. He arrived at the Sterling Innovations Tower and walked through the front lobby. The receptionist, who had never given him more than a cursory glance, looked up in confusion. He did not acknowledge her. He walked to the executive elevator and rode it up to the top floor. The boardroom was already filled. Eleanor and Marcus were there, looking haggard and defeated. The other board members, complicit in their silence for years, sat stiffly in their chairs, avoiding eye contact. Clara was there too, standing against the wall behind her mother, her face a mask of anxiety. Eleanor must have summoned her for moral support, a final, futile gesture. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened and Mr. Thompson walked in, carrying a thick, leather-bound report. "Good morning," he said, his voice filling the tense silence. "This meeting of the Board of Directors is now in session. As you know, a forensic audit has been completed. The findings are, to put it mildly, damning." Eleanor slammed her hand on the table. "This is a farce. Who are you to call this meeting? Who is this secret shareholder you supposedly represent?" Mr. Thompson smiled faintly. "My client prefers to remain anonymous for the moment, but rest assured, his authority is absolute. He owns 95% of this company. You are all here today at his discretion." Marcus sneered. "Some coward hiding behind his lawyer? Why doesn't he show his face?" As if on cue, the boardroom door opened again. Every head turned. Liam walked into the room. A collective gasp rippled through the attendees. They stared at him in stunned disbelief. They saw the janitor, the failure, the family joke, now dressed in a suit that was more expensive than anything Marcus owned. He walked with a quiet confidence that was utterly alien to them. Clara's jaw dropped, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Liam ignored them all. He walked to the head of the table, to the large empty chair that had always been reserved for the CEO, Eleanor's chair. He did not sit. He stood behind it, placing his hands on the high back, and looked down the long table at the people who had tried to destroy him. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Allow me to introduce you," he said with immense satisfaction. "This is Liam Vance. He is the sole heir to the estate of Arthur Vance and the undisputed majority owner of Sterling Innovations." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of shock and comprehension. Then Eleanor let out a choked, hysterical laugh. "You, the janitor! This is insane! It's a trick!" Liam's gaze settled on her, cold and unflinching. "It's no trick, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm and resonant, a voice they had never heard before. "You just never bothered to look past the uniform." He turned his eyes to Marcus. "You asked why I didn't show my face. I have been here all along. I was the one who emptied your trash can full of evidence. I was the one who mopped the floors you felt you were too good to walk on." Finally, his gaze fell upon his wife. Clara was trembling, her face ashen. The world she had known, the hierarchy she had worshipped, had just been inverted in the most brutal way imaginable. "You," Liam said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "You told me I needed to be useful." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "So I was. I decided to be useful and clean up my company." He began his monologue then, a quiet, devastating indictment of their entire lives. "For 5 years you treated me like dirt beneath your feet. You saw me as nothing more than an embarrassing stain on your perfect family portrait. You judged my worth by the size of my paycheck and the brand of my clothes." He looked directly at Eleanor, directly at, "You spent decades living in a castle of wealth and arrogance, but what you didn't know was that the ground beneath it belonged to my grandfather. You were tenants, and your lease has expired." He laid out their crimes one by one, with the cold precision of the audit report that Mr. Thompson had placed before him. The embezzlement, the fraud, the tax evasion, the systematic destruction of a once great company for the sake of their own vanity. With each revelation, the faces around the table grew paler, more desperate. When he was finished, the room was thick with the stench of their ruin. Eleanor finally broke. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and despair. "This company is mine! My husband built it!" "Your husband," Liam said coldly, "was a glorified manager who signed away his kingdom for a fancy title. My grandfather built this company with his mind. You simply squatted in it." Marcus lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of rage. "I'll kill you!" he screamed. Before he could take 2 steps, 2 uniformed security officers, arranged by Thompson, entered the room and restrained him. He struggled, a pathetic, flailing display of impotent fury. "As of this moment," Liam announced, his voice cutting through the chaos, "the entire board of directors is dismissed. Eleanor Sterling and Marcus Sterling, you are both terminated for cause. The authorities have been notified of your criminal activities. They are waiting for you downstairs." The breakdown was complete. Eleanor collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Marcus shouted threats and obscenities as he was dragged from the room. The other board members scrambled to gather their belongings, desperate to flee the sinking ship. Soon the room was empty, save for Liam, Mr. Thompson, and Clara. She stood frozen against the wall, her face a wasteland of shattered illusions. She finally found her voice, a weak, pleading whisper. "Liam, I didn't know." He looked at her, and for the first time he felt a flicker of pity for the small, hollow person she was. "That's the point, Clara," he said, his voice devoid of heat. "You didn't know, and you didn't care to know. You saw a janitor because that's all you wanted to see. It wouldn't have mattered if I owned the company or swept its floors. The man I was, the person who loved you, was never enough." She took a hesitant step toward him. "We can fix this. I'm your wife. We can—" Mr. Thompson stepped forward and placed a slim folder on the table in front of her. "I believe these are for you, madam," he said gently. Clara opened the folder. Inside were divorce papers. Her last hope crumbled to dust. She looked at Liam, her eyes begging for a reprieve that would never come. He simply shook his head, a final, silent dismissal. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the wreckage of the life she had chosen, in the boardroom of the company he now controlled. He did not look back. The aftermath was swift and total. Eleanor and Marcus Sterling faced a mountain of federal charges. Their assets were frozen, their homes seized, their names dragged through the mud in every newspaper and television report. They were convicted of fraud and embezzlement and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their fall from grace a cautionary tale for the city's elite. Clara, stripped of her family's name and fortune, was left with nothing. The divorce was uncontested. Liam was generous in the settlement, providing enough for her to start over, but not enough to reclaim the lavish lifestyle she craved. The last he heard, she was working as a sales associate in a department store, a bitter irony he took no pleasure in. Her punishment was to live the kind of ordinary life she had always so desperately feared. Liam, with Mr. Thompson as his advisor, dismantled the corrupt structure of Sterling Innovations. He sold off the frivolous assets, the corporate jets and luxury condos. He fired the sycophants and cronies the Sterlings had installed and promoted the talented, hard-working employees who had been overlooked for years. He rebranded the company, shedding the tarnished Sterling name and restoring his grandfather's. It became the Vance Institute, a research and development firm dedicated not to profit but to progress. He poured his newfound wealth into funding scholarships, building schools, and developing technologies that could genuinely help people. He did not move into Eleanor's mansion or buy a fleet of expensive cars. He lived modestly, finding that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in peace of mind and purpose. He had achieved his victory, a vindication so complete it left no room for bitterness or regret. One sunny afternoon, months later, Liam was walking through a park near his new, simple home. He was no longer a victim, no longer a sleeping giant. He was just a man at peace with his past and hopeful for his future. He stopped to admire the design of a newly constructed pavilion and found himself standing next to a woman who was sketching it in a notepad. She had a kind smile and intelligent, curious eyes. "It's a beautiful structure, isn't it?" she said, noticing his interest. "It is," Liam agreed. "The lines are clean, the foundation is strong." She was an architect, she explained, and they fell into an easy, genuine conversation about design, about purpose, about building things that last. Her name was Sarah. She did not know his name or his history or the size of his bank account. She just saw a man with a quiet strength and a gentle smile. And as he walked with her through the park, Liam knew that his grandfather's legacy was not the company or the money. It was the chance to build a new life, a life of his own design, on a foundation of integrity and truth. True power, he had learned, was not in what you owned, but in who you were when you had nothing, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt truly, completely, and unshakably rich.